Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Matt Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement here at Hyde Park United Methodist, and today I'm joined by the Reverend Bernie Lieving. So Bernie, what's your role here at Hyde Park?
My role here at Hyde Park is to work supporting Sally Campbell Evans in her congregational care work.
Okay.
My job, I'm part-time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did here at Hyde Park for the longest time I was here. And Sally took my place when I retired. So I'm back helping Sally doing congregational care work.
Nice. So it's sort of like leapfrog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
I like
Yes.
it. I like it.
Yeah.
So you just finished preaching a sermon on joy
Yes.
based on Philippians 2.
Yes.
Which I think, as you said in the sermon, is like a Christ hymn. It's an old hymn about who Jesus is,
Yes.
what he does. Can you summarize your sermon for us?
To summarize my sermon, I would say that we all want joy at Christmas time.
Yeah.
And joy is different. And I didn't say this in the sermon, but joy is different from happiness. Like Dr. Powery said in the quote I made, happiness is something you can just say, oh, I'm happy. But joy is something that comes into you as a gift.
Yeah.
And the greatest gift is God's gift of course, the presence of the Holy Spirit with us, following or fulfilling Jesus' promise to us.
Yeah.
But then Paul said, make my joy complete. And the way you do that is really, as I pretty much said in the sermon, serving others.
Yeah.
And that way, that's the joy that comes from God as we give ourselves to others.
Yeah. It's interesting. Happiness seems like something that I just have within me.
Yes.
But joy, like someone might say to you, you seem like a happy person, but someone wouldn't say you radiate happiness. They would say you radiate they would say you radiate joy, right? Yeah. Joy has this thing that sort of comes off of you, right?
Yes.
Happiness seems internal, but joy seems like it kind of flows out of you.
Yes. I always told couples that I was doing premarital counseling with, you cannot make each other happy. Mm-hmm. Happiness is a choice. You can fill each other with joy with the way you live your lives with one another. But happiness is a decision that we make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciated your sermon today for kind of couching us in that joy this Christmas season. Because like you said at the beginning, sometimes it can be so hard to find joy this time of year.
Yes. Yes.
So,
especially with what's going on in the world right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in our own lives here, here in the Tampa Bay area.
Of course.
With what we're recovering from the hurricanes and all that. Well, as we maybe bounce away from your sermon for a second, I want to hear a little bit more about you, Bernie Lieving, kind of your journey into ministry. Because I think you have always been someone who strikes me as having a deeply caring personality, a deeply joyful personality.
Okay.
And I want to know how that kind of began in you, how that got fostered in you through a calling into ministry.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was 14 years old. We lived on a farm. It was a farm that we just rented the house that was an empty house that was on it. Yeah. That's where I grew up. But when I was 9 years old, the farmer said, Bernard, how about just coming and doing some things for me? So I started when I was 9 years old and worked all the way through summers and weekends and sometimes regular days during the year it was a dairy farm. Okay. But one day, in the summer, I was 14 years old. I was mowing hay, sitting on the tractor, and I heard the farmer call my name. So I stopped the tractor and looked around. Where did Mr. Fry come from? And he wasn't there. I started the tractor again, and I heard my name called again. And I stopped, started, and I heard it a third time, and I stopped. And I said, God, is this you? And God said, yes. And I'm here to call you and to tell you, you are to be a pastor.
Wow.
I did not tell a soul about that. I was very much interested in vocational agriculture class in school. Mr. Bailey was my favorite teacher. And when I was ending up my junior year in high school, he said to me, what are you going to do when you graduate from high school? I said, well, just like most everybody else, I'm going to go to work either in the steel mill or the power plant. And he said, no, you're not. You can't do that. You've got to do more than that. And I said, okay. And he said, if you could do something else, what would it be? And I said, I would do what you do, Mr. Bailey. You are an example for me, and I would become a vocational agriculture teacher. Mm. And he says, well, you need to go to college. Mr. Bailey, I can't go to college. My family can't afford that. There is no way with what we have that could happen. And excuse me. He said, well, I'll tell you what, if you can get yourself into, he said, I've looked at your grades and there's some courses you need to take next year so you can get into college. And if you do that, I will see that you get a scholarship. Mm. So I went to school for that year, loved animal husbandry, all the courses about farming and all of that. And then between my two, my sophomore, my freshman and sophomore year, I was working. I was old enough then to get a job in the power plant, a summer job, and so I was doing that. And the first 2 weeks in August, when I was a kid growing up, and even still today, the first 2 weeks in August are camp meeting time. Mm. And I was there were 4 of us boys. We sat every night in the back row as far as we could get back and just sit back there and enjoy each other's company, enjoy the quartet gospel music, the singing of hymns. And one night the evangelist preached, and I don't have any idea what he preached, but I heard these words. Somebody that's sitting here tonight, I have just been told that God has called you to ministry.
So you're secret.
He said, I don't know who you are, but I know somebody sitting here has been called to ministry. And what I'm telling you, you better get up out of there where you are right now and get down here.
So that experience you had on the tractor when you were 14.
Then.
Yeah.
And so I go down and he prays with me and get in a car with mom and dad and heading home. They said, what in the world was that all about? You've done that a long time ago. You gave your heart to Jesus a long time ago. And I said, yeah, but here's what's happened. Mm-hmm. So I told them the story.
Yeah.
And they said, well, then we need to talk to our pastor. So anyway, the transfer from West Virginia University to Otterbein College, graduation from there to United Seminary, where McGray went.
Okay. So you grew up Methodist.
I grew up Evangelical United Brethren.
Oh, okay. Okay. So before the merger.
Actually, I started as United Brethren, and then in 47, it became Evangelical United Brethren.
Okay.
Then I finished seminary, went back to West Virginia, was serving a mission church in South Charleston, West Virginia, and went to annual conference in August then, rather than in spring as it is now. And at the annual conference, I was told, we're moving you. I said, I've only been there 2 months. And they said, yes, but we need you to move to Philippi. And it's really interesting. In my sermon today, I said, instead of using the term Philippi, I said Philippi.
I heard that.
And that's why, because the church I served was in Philippi, West Virginia.
Interesting.
And so I went there and met the Methodist pastor in town who had been an Army chaplain in World War II and still was a reserve chaplain. And then I told my wife one day in September of 66, I said, for 2 cents, I'd see if I can get in the Army chaplaincy. And we'd talked about it before. She never said yes or no. That day she said, why don't you?
Wow.
That day I called the chief of chaplain's office in Washington, and 6 months later I was in uniform and served for 27 years.
And you saw a lot. I know, without going into all the details.
No,
I know you were over in Vietnam for a while.
I served
Did you ever do active duty anywhere else?
I was in Vietnam for a year with soldiers out in combat.
Yeah.
So serving them. Then I served in a number of positions where I was the chaplain for a unit that had a chapel. So I did chapels, chapel services. I went to Germany, served over there for 3 years. My unit, again, was one of those units that was out there. We were on the border 4 months out of the year between West Germany and East Germany and all of that. And then I served other positions, went to school. And then I went, my next to last position was back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we went to Desert Storm.
Wow.
So I was in Desert Storm as the senior chaplain.
Yeah.
I had 250 chaplains working for me.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So you were quite literally a pastor of pastors.
I was the pastor of pastors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
My job was just traveling all over the desert, visiting all of those chaplains and chaplain assistants and unit ministry teams.
Wow.
Then it just it came a time that I thought, God called me to ministry in a church, and it's been so long since I've been in a church. I think it's time, and there was something coming that just might make a difference in my life as a chaplain, and my wife and I decided we didn't want that, and so I retired. And I had a friend that I had known for several years, a retired Army chaplain, and I knew where he was. So I called him in Tampa and said, 10 years ago, you did this in retiring from the chaplaincy. And I'm at that point now. And I said, I just don't know what to do. I've interviewed for a job and it didn't work out. And I read another one and they'd already hired somebody. And he says, well, he said, Bernie, we've got an opening here in the church. They've let the person who was the associate pastor go, or he's moved, and there's an opening. And I said, well, and he said, let me have the pastor talk with you. And so Jim Harnish and I talked, and about 3 months later, I had retired from the Army, and the 1st of August in 1994, I started serving here at Hyde Park United Methodist.
Wow. And you served here till 2000?
19 years.
Yeah.
Until I quit that job because my wife, Dorothy, had Alzheimer's, and we had committed ourselves a long time before. We'd been married for 54 years, committed ourselves to care for each other when the time came that we needed to. Yeah. And she unfortunately passed away just 2 months after into 2014. And then I went to work at Palmacia United Methodist.
That's right.
And served there on and off for about 7.5 years. So here I am.
Here you are. And I think to bring this to a close, and I'm really glad we had this time for the people watching online and listening on podcasts to be able to hear a little bit more about your story, because I think it's a life marked by service, a life marked by self-emptying, saying, God, where do you want me to be? What do you want me to do? Where do you want to send me? I'll go there. I mean, your story about sitting on that tractor, what do you think of? You think of Eli and Samuel. Not saying that you're a prophet necessarily, but that classic call story, right? You called me, right? No, I didn't call you. Go back to bed, right? Listen for the voice of God. And you heard the voice of God then.
3 times.
Right, 3 times, exactly. And then a few years later, that pastor at that camp meeting must have also been in tune, or God was using them in some way so that
absolutely,
they said what they said then, and it was like, okay, this is happening.
Yeah.
And then to find that a life can be lived through chaplaincy, which is such an interesting witness for many of us who have probably only experienced pastors as people who are in pulpits or in local churches, that kind of thing. You know that life can be lived, ministry can be lived out in that way. Yeah. So what I want to say in closing is, Bernie, thank you for modeling that Philippians 2 life of self-emptying, of kenosis, of saying, God, where do you want me to be? I'm going to go there. I'm going to do that. It's a model for a lot of us that I think we can look at your life and see a life lived with joy and a life lived in service to other people.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Bernie.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today for Beyond the Sermon. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, we'll see you around. Bye.